Welcome back, everyone. I have Meaghan Hampton on the podcast today. I'm going to introduce her, and then I can't wait to have a conversation about parenting and the nervous system. Meaghan is an LPC associate and the founder of Soul Care for Families, where she helps Christian parents raise emotionally healthy, spiritually grounded children through the integration of developmental psychology, nervous system science, and Christian theology. Her work focuses on attachment, co regulation, and cycle breaking, offering a grace centered alternative to fear and shame based approaches. She creates educational resources and content to equip families to parent with both clinical wisdom and faithfulness to scripture. Again, that is so cool. Welcome. I'd like to ask, what does that feel like for you, just even hearing your bio? This is the work you get to do in this world. What is that like for you?
Feel so lucky, like so honored. I was actually reflecting on that this morning and I feel really fortunate that this is my job and this is what I get to do and I get to walk alongside people and their stories and help equip families and so I feel really blessed.
What originally got you into this work, and how long have you been at it?
Yeah, so I originally came into this work because I was studying to be a Christian counselor, a therapist. And while I was in graduate school, I had two very young kids. My youngest was like 6 months old when I started graduate school. And I took a childhood development class. And I remember learning things that I had never even heard of before. And just being so shocked that I hadn't heard these things that I was being taught that were so like foundational and fundamental to parenting. And I think what shocked me the most was that it seemed to actually be advice that went against a lot of what I was hearing in like mom's Bible studies or um definitely there's so many amazing churches out there but some like maybe more strict churches it was going against some of those teachings that I had heard in the past and those teachings never sat well with me but I didn't have a language to explain why and so it was really eye-opening to then study the way that God made the nervous system to develop and made the brain to develop and how relationships and attachment develop. And really, I was like, I wish I had known this years ago. And I want as many parents as possible, specifically in Christian spheres, because I think that we are taught a lot of stuff that's not necessarily in line with how God created our kids to be exposed to this stuff. And so I just try to make my resources as accessible as possible for people.
You said when you started that class, you were shocked by some of the things. What was one thing that stands out?
Yes. So I think I remember hearing a lot about like kids being sinful before and learning developmentally a lot of the behaviors that parents or, different books or whatever would label as, quote unquote sin were actually like very much developmentally appropriate and how God actually designed certain like psychological stages to develop for a child. And so when a child is saying like, no, that's mine, and they're like this tiny little toddler, it's not their sin nature coming out. It's actually like the process of like individuation beginning and that's not a bad thing they just need guidance and it's not this like evidence that they're bad and so that was just really interesting to me.
Yeah, I know not everyone listening will have had this background, but we do share that, Megan. This is very much the culture I was raised in, and even before I was a parent, hanging around parents and seeing prime examples, what I thought, so that when the time came that I had my own children, I was very much in the same mindset. And things like, even when my son started to roll over on the changing table, I was taught to spank him,
Yeah.
to teach my baby, don't roll over, and things
Yeah.
like that I now cringe at in retrospect.
Excellent. There's so much
But
grace.
I'm curious, for you when you're working with a client, let's say a parent, do you work with parents or just kids or both?
Mhm.
What's your overall goal in parenting? Like, what are we aiming for? Is
Yeah, I would say safety. Emotional safety, which I think goes hand in hand with attachment. I think like safety is like layman's terms for a type of attachment, but just for our kids to know that like we are their safe place, we are their safe person. They always belong when they're with us and when they're with our family. And that no matter what they are walking through, we are going to be with them every step of the way.
I love that. I've looked at some of your stuff. I resonated with a lot of the books that you've mentioned and the books that I was handed with my firstborn. One was The Strong-Willed Child by James Dobson, and I've got it right here, it's still on my
Ooh, there it
shelf.
is.
I don't think I ever fully finished it, but I mean, there's underlines and notes in there. And then the other, Shepherding a Child's Heart, and I just remember things that I said to my son when he was little that were a normal part of my language with him was, like, to never say no, always say, "Yes, mama," and
Yeah.
I would say, "What time do we obey?" And he'd always say, "First time," like, first time.
Yes.
Well, there never should be a delay, right? Things like
Yeah.
this were coming back up as I was getting ready to meet with you, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on books or teachings like that.
Yes. I think that the authors of the book, I want to assume the best about them, that they were probably well intended and understand there's a lot of scripture that feels confusing if we don't know the genre or the intent of like who the author was writing to or the audience, all that. And it would be understandable for some of those authors to misinterpret different scriptures that they're reading. Also, I think that it's understandable for authors who, if they don't have a background in childhood development and in psychology, to kind of take their experiences and project it onto the Bible and then utilize those verses as like, here's evidence as to why we do the things that we do. And then a lot of times we hear anecdotally, well, it quote unquote works. Right. But if working means just like the kid listens versus the kid has safe attachment, then, we need to redefine what the word working really means. So I think that the authors are probably well intended, but I think a lot of them were misdirected in what they were really trying to do.
Yeah, it makes me think of the scripture, "Spare the rod, spoil the child," and so a lot have used that even in parenting workshops multiple times that I've been a part of that advocate for spanking. Some listening right now may spank, may not, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the research is pretty clear about spanking, and then I actually just recently did a reel where Ted Tripp was talking about how, well, there's no research out there that says like what are the outcomes if spanking is done quote unquote the right way, right? If the parent is warm and there's repair afterwards and all of this stuff, it's only 2 swats, all that kind of stuff. There actually is research on that. And so the research still shows that if that is one of our disciplinary tools, the outcomes aren't ideal. And then as a Christian, we have to wrestle with, well, oh my gosh, what do I do with those scriptures that talk about the rod and that talk about, what we have understood as spanking in the Bible? Marissa Frank-Spurt and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis have a book called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, and they talk a lot about this. They are more experts on this than I am. And so I would point listeners in their direction. But what I've learned is that there's three primary verses that are used to promote spanking. And the majority of them, what they're talking about is either A, in Proverbs, they are talking about this idea of the rod being metaphorical because that the type of literature that Proverbs is, it's wisdom literature, it's not prescriptive. And so it's metaphorical. And so it says, like, if you spare the rod, then you hate your son. And it's like, well, if you spare discipline and guiding your child, then you really truly are doing them a disservice. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other verses that are a little bit more explicit about striking someone with a rod, if you look at the original language, they're not talking about toddlers. It was actually a cultural practice where the entire community would gather up older boys, never girls, and always older boys that were kind of going down the wrong path. It's a shame and honor culture. They were going to shame their family, right? The entire community would gather together, or sometimes it was a judicial act done by someone in power, and they would actually use a reed and they would strike the back of this older boy in hopes to redirect him back toward making better choices. But this was never actually a parenting practice. It was never done to young children. It was never on the bum. It was never to girls. So, this whole idea of how we in the West understand spanking starts to unravel when you look at the cultural context of what those verses are actually talking about. And again, they're typically in Proverbs, so they're not even prescriptive. They're just kind of talking about wisdom and what it looked like in the culture at that point in time.
That's fascinating because there's tons of things in those times that Old Testament was written that I think we would say now, hopefully we've evolved beyond, like these aren't examples, it's just where history was at and where society was at and not necessarily something that we want to repeat. So that's really
Yes.
interesting. The version of you now, Megan, that knows the neuroscience and the attachment piece, the nervous system piece of parenting, what reframe would you offer the mom who does see behavior, discipline, obedience as king?
One thing I tell parents a lot is that if your child could do better, they would, right? And so our kids are hardwired. God has hardwired this into them to want to please us. And so if they are doing something that we are not pleased with, or they're going against something that we've said, or they are quote unquote disobeying us, that's just helpful information for us as parents. Like, it's time for us to get curious instead of feeling threatened. It's time for us to get curious and just ask ourselves, I wonder what is holding them back in this area. Sometimes it's developmental. Sometimes they're at an age where sharing is like actually really, really challenging for them. Sometimes it could be like maybe there's some neurodivergence that as parents, we haven't necessarily clocked that yet because it's not uncommon for people to get diagnosed when they're older with, ADD, ADHD, autism, all that kind of stuff. Is there any way that I can continue to pour into my attachment and my relationship with my child? As parents, truly our biggest parenting tool is our relationship with our children. If we can not see it as a threat, and that's probably going to take either some therapy or spiritual direction or just being able to kind of unpack our own childhoods as to why that would be happening in the first place. But if we can put aside seeing their misbehavior as a threat and instead get curious, we can reframe it as helpful information.
Yeah, that brings up for me the idea of reparenting that Dr. Becky, I don't know if you're into her, talks about a lot. Do you like Dr. Becky? Do you align with that? Or what do you think?
Yes,
Yeah?
I do. I think she has a lot of really good stuff out there. I think she has some helpful information about deeply feeling kids. I think that one thing she does really well is help parents realize that we don't need to like fix our kids' feelings, but instead we just need to be in it with them. I think I love her attachment focus.
Yeah, I do too. And the reparenting piece of anytime we're triggered by our kids, it's typically because it's holding up a mirror to something we weren't allowed to do or accepted for when we
100%.
were kids. And so really it's our own inner child screaming like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot let you do this, son or daughter, because I love you so much." And in the world I grew up in, if I did that, it would be love and belonging out the window. So, parenting is some big mirror work to sign up for. What's your favorite response in the moment when kids are being rude or unkind, and why?
Yes, to myself or to my kiddos.
So, when your kids are being rude, okay, I have this book too, I just have to show you, Megan. Have you ever seen this? It's for those who can't see,
You might have it,
Toddlers
but
Are
that's okay.
Assholes. It's actually so funny. This was so healing for me when I had my
Uh-huh.
second spicy DFK, deeply feeling
Love
child.
it.
It just makes light of everything moms go through with toddlers. It was good. But yeah, when your kids are being spicy.
Yes. Yeah, when kids are being spicy. So what I try to do on my best days is validate their emotion and hold a boundary with their behavior. I know that you're really upset right now, and here's what we need to do. Right. Or I can tell that you're really angry and I need you to try again. Say that respectfully or whatever it is. So validating the emotion and holding a boundary with the behavior. And then to myself, if I'm internally freaking out, I just try to compassionately say, like, of course I feel that way. I heard a great analogy one time and I wish I could remember where, but it was this idea of a bus. And so our adult self is driving this bus and we have all these different younger versions of ourselves in the back seat. And when a younger version of ourselves gets triggered and sees something that they view as dangerous, they run to the front of the bus, they try to pull us out of the driver's seat, and they start trying to drive the bus. So, meeting that version of ourselves with compassion and saying, of course, you're trying to take over the bus. This was scary for you when you were that age. I really appreciate your help. And I'm the adult now. I'm in charge and I can handle this. And just compassionately sitting them back down in their seat and driving the bus again. And so, just trying to be compassionate toward myself when it's tough.
I remember first practicing just putting my hand on my heart and being like, "You're a good mom, having a hard time," and anyone in the
Yeah.
situation would be triggered too, just dissolves some of the shame. And I love your phrase, try again. It's just this simple, non shaming, non blaming. I mean, your kid knows too when they're being rude,
Yeah.
sassy, whatever, back talking. And so it can even be in jest, us saying back to like, try again. That's not
Yeah.
how you talk to me, you know?
Great. Yeah.
Versus what most of us may have been raised with, at least me, a lot of 90s kids, which is, "Don't you disrespect, don't you talk back." Another thing you talk about is getting your partner on board, so a lot of
Mhm.
women listen, they're in a co-parenting, divorce, separation situation, or they're coming to this podcast because their marriage is currently on the rock, seeking trust rebuilding, repair, and so it feels like double duty heaviness where, my gosh, I wanna do right by my kid, but me and my husband are not on the same page right now. What comes up for you with the partner dynamic?
Yes. I would say it's a both and. I would say yes and no, right? Like what our partner does is ultimately outside of our control. And that's when we make those, difficult decisions of like, okay, are we going to co parent? What is this going to look like? All that kind of stuff. Or trying to navigate that in a marriage. If it's gotten to that point, I always recommend therapy. Marriage therapy is the best thing ever, like truly, because one thing I do try to talk to couples about is that it's not about like you think we should be parenting with this framework and you think we should be parenting with this framework. There's so many layers under that that it's really unpacking each other's childhoods and what meant safety for that person when they were a child. And so that helps us have compassion for both our what's tough for us, like our own challenges, but then we can also have compassion for why certain things are hard for our spouse, and so we're able to enter into those conversations with a little bit more curiosity and empathy instead of judgment or trying to win. And then when we're able to break down those defenses, then we're actually able to talk about content and getting on the same page and looking at the research and looking at the scriptures and talking about our values as a family and finding compromises. It's being able to find the music beneath the lyrics and tackle that first because that's foundational.
Yeah, this was the situation my husband and I were in for years. It was when our kids were young. That's typically when the most strain is on the marriage. You're still expanding your own nervous system's capacity to hold this new level of life. I don't know if you've found this, but we tried a lot of traditional mainstream therapy and counseling for years, but never learned nervous system. So we were just people coming into these sessions, triggered out of our minds, swapping a lot of words, a lot of verbal dialogue, but nobody giving us the resources to actually feel safe in our body. When you say everyone should do therapy, I totally agree. And I also think the type of therapy that you offer, finding a coach who really understands a bottom up approach to the nervous system,
Yes.
some
Yeah.
healing. Have you found that too?
Yes. Yeah. I love the fact that you said bottom up approach of being able to address the physiology of our own
Yeah.
triggers regulation first. And so I love any kind of somatic experiencing. EMDR is a really helpful modality if people are looking for one. Internal family systems is some of that inner child work that we're talking about. But yeah, something more than just traditional talking it out because there's more layers there, exactly like you're saying.
Yeah, and I know before we hit record, you told me you're training your dog for dog therapy for kids.
Yeah.
That's so cool to me, and I would love to hear what that's like in practice.
Yes. So this is Goldie, and we are training her to be a therapy dog. So basically, what she does is she comes to the office with me and she will just snuggle with adults and kids alike. But I found it really helpful to bring her on days that I'm seeing kiddos because I can only imagine how intimidating it could be as a young child to come in and have to be in a room with this random lady and tell her your hardest stuff. And so I try to make it fun. We do a lot of art in here. We do a lot of art and games and playing with sand and stuff like that. But just, I mean, everybody loves puppies. And so she's small. And so the kids will just immediately start petting her and playing with her. And they immediately just kind of loosen right up. And it's a lot easier for them to talk about some of the tougher stuff when they're able to snuggle with a puppy.
What with kids is the nature of the challenges?
Kids could come to therapy for all different types of reasons. I see a lot of kids struggling with anxiety. I really tend to work well with like girls ages 7 to 13 from a kid perspective. I primarily work with adults. So when I'm seeing kids, being able to work with young girls who are struggling with anxiety and helping them build a tolerance for that.
I don't work with children, but just the little research I've dabbled in, those rates have gone up with the rise of social media and just the different exposure our kiddos have got this next generation. So I was thinking about where my own daughter's at right now, just as an example. She's 6. And I had a friend stay with me this week and she said, Anna, do you like school? Just trying to start small talk. And my daughter's like, no. And I followed up with her later and I was like, "Hey, honey, when grown-ups ask you how you like school, that's them trying to get to know you, point of connection, maybe share something else." She's like, "But that's honest. Like, I don't like school." And I'm like, "Valid. I don't want you to lie, but how would you navigate something like that?" She's really loving the word no at age 6, or even if we have your favorite color, she'll be like, "No."
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Both my kids are pretty spicy, to be honest, and can be very blunt sometimes. And I remember having a conversation with one of them. I was talking about how much I love Taylor Swift, and one of my kids was like, "I hate Taylor Swift. I don't like Taylor Swift at all." And I was like, "You know what? It's totally cool that we don't like the same stuff. You do not have to like Taylor Swift. She's not everybody's vibe." And I saw this somewhere and I found it really helpful. Like, so I can't take credit for it, but it's worked really well. Is this idea of being able to say like, "Oh, you like XYZ? What are some things that you like about that?" And being able to like ask the other like, "Oh, you like Taylor Swift? What do you like about Taylor Swift?" Be like, "Oh, I like that she writes her own music." Okay, cool. I don't care for Taylor Swift. I really like Imagine Dragons. And so kind of giving kids a little bit of a script sometimes of like, here's how you can be honest and keep the conversation going. Just little social skills. I heard that script somewhere and I was like, I'm going to try this out. And it worked really well for my kids. I think it's helped them maintain that connection with people when they're talking about stuff that they really don't like while still maintaining their integrity and being honest.
I love that. Yeah, because there's part of me that gets triggered. Like, I
Mhm.
don't want her to come off rude to my friends. But
Right.
then there's the
Yeah.
other part of me that's just like, I also want to build social skills where she can read the room. And I've even tried to teach her what read
Yeah.
the room means. And she's like, I don't see any letters. Where are the words? I don't read anything in this
Yeah.
room. Like, that's the other thing, parents of all ages listening, but at least the stage I'm in and a lot are right now is the sibling conflict. If you were
Oh
to ask
boy.
me and my husband the hardest part of this stage, there's mostly blessings. I'm loving the stage. It's a blast to have a 9 and a
Yes.
6-year-old, and when they're
Yes.
good, they're good. When they're not, it's World War III.
Yes. We have similar ages.
So what's that?
My kids are, almost 9 and also 6.
So
Yes.
funny. I love that. I
Yes,
love
and
it
they
so
also squabble a lot.
so best advice, anything comes up when it comes to sibling conflict of how to reduce that? Or is that
The
not the goal? Is the goal for me to get more comfortable with conflict? 'Cause I was an only child and my parents were passive aggressive fighters. Tell me.
Yes, both and. It's a both and, right? Like, ideally, we would love for them to not fight as much. My kids, I always tease, like, I don't say this to them, but me and my husband will tease each other, be like, they're like an old married couple. Like, they love each other or they hate each other, you know? Like, one thing that we will try to do is encourage them to work it out themselves. Of like, okay, how can you both get your needs met here? Is something that we say literally all the time. How can you both get your needs met here? I would love to see how you guys can both work this out. Show me how you can both work this out together. Now, if one sibling is getting picked on a lot more than the other, we'll step in, because I just think that's, important at that point. But when it's more of just like they're, bickering back and forth about like the most random stuff, then we'll try to encourage them, like, how can you both get your needs met here?
Yeah, I love that. And it's the same with marriage counseling, right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
love that
Yeah.
you said they're
So
like an old
yeah.
married because they're getting more practice than I did, honestly. I love the mantras, the one-liners, any other go-to repeated scripts or mantras in your house that really you found success with?
I love when Dr. Becky says, "I believe you." Like, I believe that that's what that feels like. That's like a version of the validation of like, I can tell that you feel like this, or I know you feel blank. Anything that's validating their emotion, people can get caught up in that because they're like, well, I don't want to validate their emotion for 30 minutes. And I would say, don't. That's a long time. I don't even do that in therapy. But you can just be like, yeah, I can tell that you feel really sad. It's normal to feel that way. I remember when I felt that way. and then holding that boundary. So, one thing we're trying to do more of is asking your kids, like, hey, where do you feel that in your body? Do you feel sad? Yeah. Where do you feel that in your tummy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I know what that's like. Let's just snuggle here together. And so
Yeah.
trying to get them in touch with their body a little bit at a young age.
Again, it just circles back to what you shared at the beginning, not fixing or even having the right words to come up with, but being able to hold space and just be with your kids. One of the
Yeah.
go-tos, again, from Dr. Becky is whatever they're coming to me with, good, bad, ugly, like, "Thank you so much for bringing that to me." And it's perfect.
Yes.
1, it gives me time to think if I do actually need to respond,
Yep.
and 2, it reinforces, "I want you to come to me no matter." And it's also like a pause, yeah, before speaking something that's really not authentic or helpful. The most important thing is the relationship and that attachment. Thank you for coming to me with this. I'm so glad you came to me.
Yes. I love that. That one's so good.
Yeah. Well, I loved this conversation, Megan. Is there anything else that comes up for the woman who may have had some religious trauma, well-meaning, but, not healthfully executed advice in the parenting department? Anything else that you think is important?
Yeah. Just encourage women that God gave you your intuition for a reason. Your intuition isn't bad, and that it's important to listen to your body and to what your body is telling you, and to know that part of you is not bad. Sometimes we hear, theology around the idea of the flesh and we equate it with our bodies. And so I think it turns women away from trusting their intuition and then outsourcing parenting, practices to other people. And so ultimately with my work, my goal is to work myself out of a job. I want people to trust themselves.
I love that so much. Yeah, that could be a whole nother episode. Even scriptures like the heart is deceitful above all things can create this corroded relationship with our intuition. We're taught to fear our
Yes.
feelings or our body. So I love that.
Yes.
God got an inner whisper. We have that frequency, that line of connection available to all of us. So,
Yes.
Megan, where can
Yes.
people connect with you, learn more about your work?
So my Instagram handle is at Soul Care for Families. And on there, I have a lot of free resources where I try to share stuff through reels or carousels. But then I also have some more affordable resources that teach parents about co regulation, self regulation. My husband and I just put out a mini parenting course. So if anybody's interested in any of that, they can hop on over to my page and I would love to resource them any way I can.
That begs one last question is with co-regulation, is it any different between human nervous systems and co-regulating with a dog? Do you know?
Such a good question. Okay, so clinically, I have no idea. I actually have no idea, but personally, I think it's very co-regulating to snuggle with
Yeah.
my puppy. And I've
Yeah.
actually talked to other therapists about that too. And so I'm sure there are some differences, but being with a safe animal, there's just something special about it. And I find it really regulating.
Now I wanna nerd out and look that up because I know with humans, our circadian rhythm, our heartbeats can sync up, our breath can sync up, so I wonder
Yeah,
if it's the same for dogs since they
me too.
typically breathe a little faster than we do and stuff like that.
Yay.
Um
So
You're a
fascinating.
joy to meet, Megan. Thank you for coming, and, I'll link everything in the show notes if anyone wants to follow her on Instagram. That's where I stumbled upon her work. She's really funny too. She puts out entertaining but educational content, and, you can connect with her in all the links in the show notes. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.